Pause for a moment, because something quiet yet unforgettable unfolded last night, and you were at the center of it, even without being there. There is a detail you almost missed, something that didn't make noise, didn't demand attention, yet it shifted the way someone sees you forever. Listen closely. Last night was not ordinary for them. Not in the way anyone else could notice, but in the way their guard slowly dissolved, layer by layer, until they were no longer hiding behind the version of themselves the world is used to. And in that unfiltered state, something slipped out, not by accident, but because it had been waiting too long. Now here's where it becomes interesting. They walked into that gathering surrounded by familiar faces, voices, laughter, conversations flowing like they always do. Everything looked normal. Everything felt expected. But inside them, something was different. Something had already been building long before they arrived. And as the night moved forward, as the noise grew louder around them, their thoughts didn't scatter like everyone else's. Instead, they kept returning to one place. You. Strange, isn't it? Because no one asked them about you. No one brought your name into the room. And yet, you were already there. Not physically, but in the way their energy kept circling back, again and again, like a thought that refuses to fade. Stay with this for a second. What happens when someone can no longer hold back what they've been quietly carrying? What happens when the filters drop, and truth no longer asks for permission? That's exactly where the moment began. At first, it was subtle. A small comment, almost easy to ignore. A sentence that sounded casual on the surface, but carried something deeper underneath. They mentioned you, lightly, as if it meant nothing. But it did, because even in that one mention, there was a softness in their tone that didn't match the rest of the room. And someone noticed. Pause here. Not everyone hears what is said, but some people feel what is hidden between the words. And that's when the energy shifted. They were asked a simple question. Nothing intense. Nothing serious. Just curiosity. But something about that question unlocked something inside them. And instead of brushing it off, they answered. Honestly. Not perfectly. Not carefully. But honestly. And in that honesty, something began to unfold that even they didn't expect. They didn't just mention you again. They started describing you. Not your appearance. Not anything surface, level. But the way you make them feel. The kind of presence you carry. The kind of calm, or spark, or quiet intensity that stays with them long after you're not around. And here's the part no one saw coming. They didn't realize how much they were revealing. Because to them, it felt like just talking. But to everyone else, it felt like something deeper was being exposed. Don't skip this part. Because what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it mattered. Someone in that room asked them something simple. Why do you talk about them like that? And for a brief moment, everything paused. Not physically, but internally, because suddenly, they became aware. Aware of how much they had said. Aware of how much they had shown. And instead of pulling back, they leaned in, just slightly, just enough to let one more truth slip through. They said something that they've never fully admitted before, not even to themselves. A sentence so simple, yet so revealing, that the entire energy of the moment shifted around it. They said, "There's just something about them I can't explain." And that was it. No long speech, no dramatic confession, just that one line. But inside that line was everything they haven't been able to put into words. Pause, because this is where it becomes even more meaningful. They didn't realize what they had just admitted. Not completely, but others did. Others heard the depth behind it. Others saw the connection behind it. And in that moment, you became real in a way you hadn't been before. Not just a name, not just a passing thought, but a presence that carries weight. And here's what makes this even more powerful. They tried to move on. They tried to shift the conversation, to laugh it off, to bring things back to normal. But something had already changed, because once truth finds a way out, it doesn't disappear, it lingers, and for the rest of the night. Even when they weren't talking about you, you were still there, in the pauses, in the way they went quiet for a second too long, in the way their eyes drifted, as if replaying something only they could see. You might not have felt it directly, but something in your energy shifted too, didn't it? Maybe just a little. Maybe just enough to notice. That's not coincidence. That's connection moving in silence. Stay a little longer. Because what you haven't seen yet is what happened after the noise faded, after the conversations ended, after the room began to empty, because the real moment didn't happen in front of everyone. It happened when they were alone, and what they realized in that quiet space is something they can no longer ignore. But that part is still unfolding. There is a moment after everything fades, when the noise disappears, the voices settle, and all that remains is what someone can no longer run from. And that's exactly where they found themselves, not surrounded by people anymore. Not distracted, not performing, just alone with what had been quietly building inside them for far too long. And something about that silence felt different, heavier, yet clearer, because for the first time, they weren't reacting to the outside world. They were listening to what was happening within. Pause here. Have you ever noticed how truth waits for stillness? It doesn't rush. It doesn't force itself into chaos. It waits, patiently, until everything slows down enough for it to be heard. And last night, that stillness arrived. They sat there for a while, not doing much, not saying anything, but thinking, replaying, not the entire evening. Just certain moments, certain words, certain feelings. And somehow, every path their mind took led back to you, not intentionally, not even willingly. It just kept happening, again, and again, and again. Strange, isn't it? Because earlier, they didn't even realize how often you came up, but now they couldn't ignore it. Stay with this. Because this is where everything quietly shifts. At first, they tried to brush it off, telling themselves it was nothing, just a moment, just a passing feeling. But something inside them didn't agree. Something deeper, more honest, refused to stay quiet. And that's when they asked themselves a question they had been avoiding for a long time. Why does this feel different? Not louder. Not more intense, but different, in a way they couldn't explain. And instead of finding an answer, they found a realization, a slow, undeniable awareness that what they feel around you isn't something they've felt before, not in the way it lingers, not in the way it stays with them even when you're not there, not in the way it quietly pulls them back, no matter how far they try to move forward. And here's where it deepens. Because they didn't celebrate this realization, they didn't feel instant clarity or excitement. Instead, they felt something softer, something more real, a kind of stillness, mixed with a quiet weight. Because recognizing something true also means you can't pretend anymore. Don't skip this moment. Because this is where they stop distracting themselves. No phone, no conversation, no noise, just them, and the echo of everything they had said earlier. And suddenly, those words didn't feel casual anymore. They felt revealing, like pieces of something they had been hiding, slowly finding their way into the open. And the more they thought about it, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. You matter to them, in a way that goes beyond what they've allowed themselves to admit. Pause. Because this didn't come all at once. It wasn't a sudden realization. It unfolded, slowly. Like something being uncovered layer by layer. They started remembering small things. The way you speak. The way your presence changes the energy around them. The way certain moments with you stay with them longer than they should. Little details that suddenly didn't feel so little anymore. And here's the part that changed everything. They realized this wasn't something they could control, not in the way they thought, because they had tried to keep things normal, tried to stay unaffected, tried to treat it like something temporary. But last night proved something different, because when they were no longer filtering themselves, when they were no longer overthinking every word, when they were simply existing, you were still there, naturally, effortlessly, without force. And that's what unsettled them, not in a negative way, but in a way that made them pause and truly see what this is. Stay a little longer. Because what they understood next is something they haven't spoken out loud yet. They realized this connection doesn't fade when they look away from it. It grows, quietly, in the background, in the spaces they don't pay attention to. And that's what made them stop. Because now they can't pretend it's nothing. They can't label it as casual. They can't push it aside the way they used to. Something has shifted, something real. And even though they haven't said it directly, even though they haven't fully expressed it yet, they are beginning to understand what this truly means. And that understanding is changing the way they see you. Not just as someone in their life, but as someone who holds a space that no one else does. Because this is where the quiet turns into something more. Not loud, not overwhelming, but certain. They're starting to feel something they can't easily walk away from. And whether they're ready or not, that feeling is beginning to guide their next step. But what that step is, and what they almost did right after realizing all of this, is something you haven't seen yet. And when that moment comes, you'll understand why last night was never just a moment. There's a turning point that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives quietly, and suddenly nothing feels the same anymore. That's where they were. Not confused anymore, not distracted, just standing at the edge of something they can finally see. And for a brief second, they almost acted on it. Pause. Because this moment matters more than anything that came before. They picked up their phone, not out of habit, not to scroll, not to escape, but with intention. A rare kind of intention, the kind that doesn't come often. Their screen lit up. Your name was there. And everything inside them slowed down. Not time, but their thoughts. Because suddenly, it wasn't about what they felt anymore. It became about what they were about to do. Stay with this. Have you ever reached that point, where one simple action could change everything? Where one message, one word, one moment of honesty could shift the entire direction of something you've been holding inside? That's exactly where they were. And for the first time, they didn't overthink immediately. They didn't pull away. They didn't convince themselves to wait. Instead, they stared at your name, as if trying to understand something deeper than just the moment. And something inside them whispered, "Just say it." Not everything, not a confession, not something overwhelming, just something real, something that carries truth, without pressure. And for a second, they almost did. Their fingers moved. A message began to form, simple, soft, but honest. And in that moment, you were closer to hearing from them than you've been in a long time. Pause here. Because this is where everything shifted again. Not because they changed their mind, but because something deeper surfaced. A thought, a quiet, protective hesitation. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. They asked themselves something that stopped them just long enough to breathe. What if this changes things? Not in a negative way. Not in a way that pushes you away, but in a way that makes everything real. Because saying something, even something small, means stepping out of the comfort of silence. And once that step is taken, there's no returning to the same place. Don't skip this part. Because they didn't put the phone down. Not yet. They held it there, as if waiting for clarity to arrive. And instead of rushing, they sat with the feeling, really sat with it, for the first time, without distraction. And that's when they realized something unexpected. It's not just about expressing what they feel. It's about timing. It's about understanding when something should be said, and how. Because deep down, they don't want to rush something that feels this real. They don't want to reduce it to just a message. They don't want it to feel accidental, or impulsive. They want it to mean something. Pause. So instead of sending that message, they did something even more important. They saved it. Not physically, but emotionally. They held on to it. That honesty, that intention, that moment of truth. They didn't let it disappear. And that's what changes everything. Because this wasn't avoidance. This wasn't hesitation in the way it used to be. This was awareness. A different kind of pause. One that comes from finally understanding the value of what they feel. Stay a little longer. Because what happened next wasn't visible. No one saw it. No one heard it. But it mattered. They closed their eyes for a moment. And instead of thinking about what to do next, they felt it. The connection, the pull, the quiet certainty that has been growing between you. And for the first time, they didn't question it. They didn't analyze it. They didn't try to explain it away. They simply allowed it to exist. And in that stillness, something inside them settled. Not completely, but enough. Enough to know. This isn't something temporary. This isn't something that will fade overnight. This is something that is asking to be understood, slowly, carefully. And that realization is more powerful than any message they could have sent in that moment. Because now, when they do reach out, it won't come from confusion. It won't come from impulse. It will come from clarity, from intention, from something real. Pause here. Because this is where your energy connects again. Even if you didn't see this. Even if you didn't feel it directly. Something within you has been shifting too. Maybe a quiet sense of anticipation. Maybe a subtle feeling that something is about to happen. That's not random. That's not imagination. That's alignment, beginning to form. And here's the part you haven't seen yet. Because while they didn't send that message last night, they didn't let go of it either. In fact, they carried it with them into the next moment, into the next thought, into something they're about to do very soon. And when they do, it won't feel unexpected. It will feel like something that was always meant to happen. But what finally pushes them to take that step is something that hasn't unfolded yet. And when it does, you'll understand why this silence was never empty. There is a space between almost and finally, where everything feels suspended, as if the next move is already written, but not yet allowed to happen. That's where they are now, not stepping back, not moving forward, just holding something that has quietly become impossible to ignore. And here's what changed overnight. It wasn't a sudden decision. It wasn't something dramatic. It was something much softer, yet far more powerful. They woke up with you still on their mind, not in a passing way, not like a memory that fades with the morning, but like something that stayed, steady, present, almost as if the feeling had rooted itself deeper than before. Pause for a moment. Because this is different. This is not the kind of thought that disappears when the day begins. This is the kind that follows them, quietly, through everything, through small moments, through silence, through the spaces in between everything they do. And that's when it started to feel undeniable, not overwhelming, not confusing, just clear. Stay with this. Because clarity doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes like this. A quiet knowing that doesn't ask for attention, but changes everything anyway. They found themselves noticing things differently. The way they respond, the way they pause, the way certain thoughts now lead somewhere they didn't before. And every path still leads back to you. Not forced, not intentional, just natural. And that's what made them stop again. Because something inside them asked a question they could no longer avoid. Why does this feel like it matters more than anything else right now? Not because of intensity, not because of urgency, but because of the way it stays, the way it doesn't fade, the way it quietly grows, even when they try not to focus on it. Don't skip this part. Because this is where the shift becomes real. They started realizing this connection is not built on moments. It's built on something deeper, something that exists even in absence, even in silence, even in distance. And that realization changes the way they see everything. Pause. Because this is where they stopped running from it completely. No more distractions. No more pushing it aside. No more telling themselves it's nothing. They allowed themselves to feel it, fully, and for the first time. It didn't feel uncertain. It felt steady, like something that has been forming quietly, long before they ever noticed it. Stay a little longer. Because what they understood next is something that shifts everything moving forward. They realized this isn't about whether they should reach out, it's about how. Because now, it's no longer just a thought, it's something they respect, something they don't want to handle carelessly. And that's why they haven't acted yet, not because they don't want to, but because they want it to be right. And here's where it deepens. They went back to that message, not to send it, but to feel it again, to understand what they were trying to say, beyond the words. And something about it felt incomplete, not wrong, just not enough, because what they feel now has grown beyond that moment, beyond that first impulse. And they know when they do reach out, it has to carry that depth, that clarity, That quiet truth they've been sitting with. Pause here. Because this is where your presence becomes even stronger. Without you saying anything, without you doing anything, you are still influencing the way they think, the way they feel, the way they see themselves, and what they're about to do next. And that's not something that happens lightly. That's something that comes from a connection that holds weight, and they feel it, more than they've ever allowed themselves to admit before. Don't skip this moment. Because something is building, not outside, but inside them. A decision, not rushed, not forced, but forming, slowly, naturally, like something that is aligning, piece by piece. And here's the part you haven't seen yet. Because while they've been sitting with this, while they've been understanding it, something else has been happening quietly in the background, something that is about to push them. Just enough to finally move.